The game is fun. The game is a battle. If it's not fun, why bother? If it's not a battle, where's the fun? It's a test that you pass. Damn it. A race against time. Fun and battle always walk together. The game is also something else. It's a journey to new worlds. Maybe even an odyssey. A look, a feel.
Star Fox. The series made a name for itself by being a massive technical achievement in 3D gaming when the original released in 1993. Since then, Nintendo has boldly rebooted and repurposed the franchise with every technical advancement championed by their gaming devices. Whether it was the increased polygonal processing power displayed in 64, the touchscreen precision utilized in Command, and most recently, the gyroscope off-screen controls experienced in Zero. Although this tactic of pairing Star Fox titles alongside hardware breakthroughs did wonders when the franchise was in its infancy, recent iterations have faced their fair share of financial struggles. The last 3 games in the series were also the worst selling, with Star Fox Zero in particular moving less than 500,000 copies worldwide. However, what do recent sales figures truly mean when considering the current state of the franchise? When can we expect future Star Fox games to arrive on Nintendo platforms, if at all? And how did we get to this point in the first place? Well, as Peppy would say, let's quit dinking around and dive straight into how Fox McCloud went from hero on the SNES to zero on the Wii U. Like all good sci-fi origin stories, we begin a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Okay, well, not exactly Star Wars, but rather Star Glider, a game series released for personal computers in the late 80s, which was heavily inspired by the space battles portrayed throughout the Star Wars saga. Star Glider and its sequel, Star Glider 2, were developed by British studio Argonaut Software, who had a particular knack for making 3D space shooting simulators. Looking to expand beyond their Star Glider franchise, Argonaut began experimenting with dedicated video game platforms. 2 prototypes were developed thanks to this initiative, the first being an early version of X, a game that would wind up becoming one of the first and only 3D games released for the original Game Boy. The second prototype was a port of Star Glider for the NES, cheekily named NES Glider. NES Glider was never actually released to the public. Instead, it became the foundation for what was soon to become the original Star Fox for the Super Nintendo. After being incredibly impressed by the prototypes for both X and NES Glider, Nintendo forged a 3-game partnership with Argonaut in hopes of bringing more 3D experiences to their platforms. Argonaut had agreed to provide the engine for a 3D SNES space shooter which drew heavily from NES Glider. Nintendo, on the other hand, would be in charge of the design, with Shigeru Miyamoto himself being a producer on the project. In hopes of subverting the expectations of a shooting game, Miyamoto suggested that the main characters should all be animals, and the rest, as they say, is history. Star Fox would go on to sell nearly 3 million copies worldwide and remains to this day one of the earliest examples of a true 3D experience on a home console. Pleased with these results, Nintendo immediately commissioned Argonaut to begin working on a sequel. In Star Fox 2, the team was going to push the technical boundaries even further. The game introduced an all-range mode, which allowed Fox to fly in full 360 degrees, strategic gameplay segments to add a layer of drama, and R-Wing transformations, including the infamous Chicken Walker. The game appeared to be a true evolution for the franchise. However, Star Fox fans would never get a chance to experience it. At least not officially. Nintendo decided against releasing Star Fox 2 despite it being almost completely finished. Miyamoto has stated that the reason for this was mainly thanks to the company's upcoming 64-bit console, which was initially scheduled to launch soon after Star Fox 2's planned release date. This decision, amongst many others, would begin to put a real strain on the subset of developers working for Argonaut who had been exclusively contributing to Nintendo titles thanks to the partnership forged years earlier. Now having developed X, Star Fox, and Star Fox 2, their 3-game contract was coming to a close, and as Jez San, founder of Argonaut, would later explain, there was little hope of rekindling the relationship. Any benefits gained from working for Nintendo were severely outweighed by the financial and creative freedoms restricted by the partnership, and Nintendo was not paying the Argonaut team the serious cash being offered by other companies at the time. Now left with an unreleased sequel that carried a plethora of ideas waiting to be utilized, an internal team at Nintendo would end up developing the next entry in the franchise on their own.
It's about time you showed up, Fox.
The added memory and processing power from their new Nintendo 64 console allowed Miyamoto to inch closer to his goal of crafting a true space fantasy adventure by including a more detailed plot and actual voice dialogue. However, Star Fox 64 wouldn't be complete unless it had some technical breakthrough that made it just as unique and alluring as its SNES predecessor. If the original Star Fox took console gamers on what may have been their first trip to the third dimension, 64 would take them to the fourth.
This is the Rumble Pack. The big reason why Star Fox 64 is the coolest cinematic gaming experience there is.
The Rumble Pack would launch alongside Star Fox 64 in 1997, with each copy of the game coming pre-packaged with the accessory. It wouldn't take long after the game launched to squash any fears that Nintendo had made a mistake in stopping the development of Star Fox 2. 64 outsold its predecessor by 1 million copies, despite a much smaller install base, and the Star Fox brand was beginning to show some real promise as a hot new Nintendo IP. In spite of this, Falco, Slippy, and the rest of Team Star Fox were about to take a back seat in order to make way for other first-party titles. It was likely never Nintendo's intention to internally develop games for the Star Fox franchise, but with Argonaut out of the picture, Nintendo had no choice but to begin looking for a new home for Fox McCloud. Miyamoto would no longer play as big of a role in the franchise as he did with the previous titles. Instead, he actively remained on the lookout for external opportunities to bring Star Fox back into the living rooms of Nintendo fans. One such opportunity arrived in 2000 when the company was preparing for the launch of their next home console, the GameCube. As a second-party developer for Nintendo, Rare had been working on a game called Dinosaur Planet, which was scheduled to release for the GameCube soon after launch. When Miyamoto caught a glimpse at an early build of Dinosaur Planet, he noticed that the game featured key similarities to the Star Fox franchise. Similarities which included main characters that looked like foxes and flying sections that resembled traditional R-Wing space sequences. With encouragement from Nintendo, Rare took Dinosaur Planet and reworked it into Star Fox Adventures, the series' first spin-off title. Despite the name, Star Fox Adventures shared more in common with the Legend of Zelda franchise thanks to its third-person combat and puzzle-solving mechanics. Although there is no denying that Adventures was never meant to act as anything more than a side story, it would forever supplant itself as being the black sheep for the franchise. Gamers voiced these concerns with their wallets, as Adventures would unfortunately become the first entry in the series to sell less than its predecessor when it finally released in 2002. However, before Adventures would officially release, Nintendo had struck a second deal with an external developer, Namco, to develop yet another Star Fox title, Star Fox Assault. Assault was a lot closer to a traditional Star Fox experience than Adventures, but would also wind up falling short of fans' expectations for the franchise. Yes, there were R-Wing and Landmaster segments, just like there were in 64, but mixed in was yet another attempt at the on-foot combat introduced in Adventures. At 1.08 million units, Assault sold even less than Adventures when it finally released in 2005. The Star Fox brand was quickly taking a turn for the worse, and it was clear that Nintendo needed to take a step back in hopes of bringing the franchise back to its roots. Luckily for Nintendo, a key programmer from the original Star Fox development team, Dylan Cuthbert, had left his post at Argonaut shortly after completing work on Star Fox 2. After a brief stint working for Sony, Cuthbert eventually decided it was time to start his own studio. Thankfully, Miyamoto and others at the Big N immediately recognized Q Games as a potential partner and offered to publish the studio's first title, DigiDrive. While working on DigiDrive, Cuthbert continually expressed his interest in allowing Q Games to develop a Star Fox title for Nintendo. Takaya Imamura, who was steadily becoming the chief Patreon for the Star Fox franchise at Nintendo, challenged Cuthbert to create a prototype utilizing an early dev kit of their DS hardware. Cuthbert and the team at Q Games ported a small portion of the original Star Fox onto the DS and presented it to the company. Imamura was impressed and decided to give Q Games the green light on developing the next Star Fox title. With Imamura's EAD team handling the design and Cuthbert's Q Games providing the engine, Star Fox Command was shaping up to become a true development sequel to the original Star Fox. In fact, much of the game's core design mechanics were taken straight from the unreleased Star Fox 2 playbook. Like Star Fox 2, Command's gameplay remained entirely in all-range mode, as opposed to the on-rail shooting segments the series was known for. Also taken from the squandered sequel was an element of strategic decision-making, which seemed to be a perfect fit to go along with the touchscreen capabilities of the DS. Despite the general consensus that Star Fox Command's R-Wing-focused gameplay was a step in the right direction, the game sold just 0.53 million copies. As the worst-selling game in the series, Command had left Nintendo in an extremely difficult position. Miyamoto would later reflect on this in an interview a few years after Command's release. Every time we make a Star Fox game, I'm hoping people will enjoy it as much as I do. Of course, the goal every time is to try and make it more and more fun, but, at least in Japan, the people that purchase the Star Fox games has decreased over the years. But we still try to make them more fun, and hopefully people will see the appeal in those games. The future of Fox McCloud had never been so uncertain, and although Nintendo had struck gold with their latest hardware devices, the Wii and DS, the company decided to play it safe when it came to the Star Fox franchise for the rest of the console generation. It's not like Nintendo didn't try to come up with an idea for what a Star Fox Wii would look like. Prototypes for the game were being developed almost immediately after the Wii released in 2006. However, the company was never able to come up with an idea that they thought truly worked well for the console. So Nintendo placed the series on hiatus for the time being, and it wouldn't be until they were deep into the production of their next handheld device that discussions for a new Star Fox title would come into play. The 3DS promised a true 3D experience without the need of an expensive TV and those flimsy glasses. To commemorate the release of the console, Nintendo wanted to make sure that the 3DS launched alongside a handful of games which truly showed off what the hardware was capable of. Star Fox, it seems, was a no-brainer. Star Fox 64 3D improved upon the original in multiple ways, making it more than simply a 3D version of 64. Even with the 3D slider completely off, the game received a visual facelift, making it the best looking title in the series up until that point. The 3D remake would also take full advantage of the system's internal gyroscope by giving gamers the option to control their R-Wing's aiming reticle via motion. Star Fox 64 3D was a love letter to the original, which released 14 years prior, and Nintendo was hoping that it would be enough to not only revitalize the Star Fox brand, but also provide a compelling reason for consumers to purchase a 3DS. The timing would prove unfortunate for Nintendo, as the 3DS was in a complete state of dismay. By the time the remake hit store shelves in July, Nintendo was already making plans to slash the price of the 3DS by $70 just 1 month later in August. Despite releasing amongst much harsher circumstances, Star Fox 64 3D sold nearly twice as well as its predecessor. The increase was respectable, but the game was certainly not proving to be the evergreen system seller Nintendo had hoped for. Unfortunately, Nintendo found themselves in an extremely similar position when the Wii U launched a year later. By 2014, the company was reporting their third operating loss in a row, and it was clear that Nintendo was having trouble communicating the true value of the console. As a last attempt at conveying the appeal of the Wii U, the president and CEO of Nintendo at the time, Satoru Iwata, announced that the majority of internal game development for the system would focus on highlighting the specific uses for the gamepad. The gamepad was what made the console truly unique from its competitors, and having games which showed off the controller's full potential would provide a compelling reason for consumers to finally jump into the Wii U ecosystem. In response, Miyamoto and many of the internal development teams within Nintendo began experimenting with game prototypes that made heavy use of the gamepad. 3 of these prototypes were shown off at E3 later that year: Project Giant Robot, Project Guard, and Star Fox for Wii U. Miyamoto was the most excited about Star Fox, as he believed that the Wii U could offer a unique aerial cockpit experience that previous Nintendo consoles could only hope for. The need for high-quality system sellers on the Wii U, combined with a strong belief in the prototype, brought a real sense of urgency to the Star Fox project. I wanted to motivate ourselves to complete the game as quickly as possible, so we decided to bring it here to E3 and announce it to give us that motivation. To achieve Miyamoto's goal of completing the title within a year of that announcement, Nintendo was once again hoping to attract the aid of an external developer to take on yet another Star Fox title. The reason for the lack of aid by Q Games is unclear, but it is probable that the development schedule simply didn't line up. Nintendo was hoping to finish this game as quickly as possible, and it's likely that the resources at Q Games were all tied up for the time being. Regardless of the exact reason, Cuthbert was out, and Nintendo would have to look elsewhere for a development partner. Japanese developer Platinum Games had held a keen interest in working on a Star Fox project long before the Wii U was even released. Platinum's enthusiasm for the franchise continued well into their current project, Bayonetta 2, which was not only being published by Nintendo, but included a Star Fox Easter egg which allowed players to temporarily take control of an R-Wing. As development for Bayonetta 2 was beginning to slow down, the timing and circumstances could not have been more serendipitous for both companies. Because of this, Platinum would be in charge of delivering the next Star Fox title for the Wii U, scheduled to release sometime in 2015. However, the new control scheme inspired by the Wii U's gamepad proved to be a difficult beast to tame. Traditional Star Fox games were known for needing precise movements and snappy decision-making to achieve a high score. By splitting the action across 2 screens and heavily relying on motion-controlled aiming, the team was having trouble perfecting the gameplay loop. Because of this, Zero would ultimately be delayed. Nintendo cited that they wanted to polish the game a bit more so that players would be able to more smoothly grasp the new style of play. This extra polish pushed the release for the title to April of 2016, 2 full years after the company's initial plea to quickly develop gamepad-centric games. Nintendo was right to be concerned about the new motion-based control scheme, as its inclusion in the game quickly surfaced as a hot-button topic surrounding the release of Star Fox Zero. The game would go on to become the worst-selling title in the franchise at 0.41 million units sold. The company never officially commented on the game's sales figures, but with Japan experiencing their lowest first week of sales in the franchise's history, and analysts predicting that Zero was likely an unprofitable venture for the series, it's hard to imagine that Nintendo was happy with these results. With this in mind, the future of the franchise looks fairly bleak. Star Fox hasn't seen popularity or financial viability since 64 released in 1997. Since then, the series has been passed around by 4 separate developers with varying degrees of success. Yet even today, there are very few roadblocks that keep Nintendo from developing another Star Fox title. All of the pieces are there. Imamura remains a current director of Nintendo's EPD Production Group No. 5, the group that worked alongside Platinum in designing Star Fox Zero. Q Games is still very much alive, and Cuthbert has continued to express his interest in the franchise, apart from claiming that his team is neither currently working with Nintendo, nor are they developing for the Switch. Even Miyamoto has expressed his desire for Fox McCloud to become a household name. When asked about Nintendo properties that Miyamoto felt warranted more attention, and remember, this is after Zero had released, he responded by saying, "I always wanted Fox McCloud to be a bit more popular than he is, but I think one more would be Pikmin. So I think these 2, I'll need to put some more energy into." I don't mean to sound overly optimistic though. With new Nintendo properties like Splatoon rising up and seemingly dominating the first-party space, internal resources start to spread themselves thin, and the argument for bringing back older franchises begins to fade. There is no publicly available evidence that a new Star Fox title is currently in the works. All we know is that they can do it. The people and development teams are still intact. Their motivation for the franchise has yet to wane, and if there's one thing we know about Fox McCloud, it's that he trusts his instincts and never gives up.